I think he would say something along the lines of being temperamental is for people who are independently wealthy. Put your butt in the seat and start writing and keep writing and keep writing and keep writing. It's, he was definitely someone who taught himself through doing it. And I think he felt that, and as I was just saying, there's also that opening the door to the unconscious thing, and that you kind of have to do it in order to do it. It's always a struggle for me, because I tend to get myself into creative projects where I will do all the creative writing work, and then I'll have done like I did a couple of very, very advanced audio dramas. I mean, easily as complex dialogue cut, sound effects, music as a feature film, except it was just me and one other guy doing it. So the post-production on it went on and on and on. It was a very intense technical work. Or I'll do something like a graphic novel, so get the script ready to go, get the thing laid out. But then it's 2 years of technical work with the artist, getting every page exactly right. Hey, you missed the pocket on this guy's vest. We need to get a pocket to go in there. Just all this kind of very technical stuff. And so I tend to flip back and forth from one to the other, and the transition back into the pure creative mode's really hard. Dad was really right about this. It's difficult.
Everybody, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter, where we have great authors on the podcast, great conversations about writing, and to encourage you as an author as well in your journey. And today we not only have an amazing author, we have the son also of an amazing author and writer on the show, which makes me really excited. Beau L'Amour is on the podcast. Beau, I'm so excited to have you here. That last name has some really amazing significance, and I really want to jump in and talk about you and the legacy of your family. But welcome to the podcast. Nice to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. Tell everybody, Beau, where are you in this big world of ours?
I am in Los Angeles. I'm in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles. And today, unlike last week, we have absolutely no reason to have fire burning behind us.
Like me, with my fire blazing here in Canada, right?
I think it's pushing 80 degrees today.
So this is completely irrelevant for you in the moment, right? See my fire.
It looks nice. It looks really nice.
There you go. My cat enjoys it. I do it for my cat, to be quite transparent.
Wow.
My cat's a big fan of the fire. I'm going to start shutting it down. It's the end of March. It's about time to shut the fire off, right? Yeah. Got to keep the cat happy. Nice. Beau, I'm excited to have you here. I've been listening to you on other shows and following your journey as you're out sharing about your journey as an author. But again, going to that famous last name, I've heard this name before. And for listeners, I'd love to kind of explore this. Could you talk a little bit about your legacy, your father, kind of set the stage for us as a listener? That last name, the significance. Can you tell us a little bit more?
So I'll back up a little bit. Dad was a kid who grew up in North Dakota. He was born just after the turn of the century. He was born in 1908. We have very big, my father's family, we have very big generations. So my dad was born in 1908. I was born in 1961. His father was born in 1868. So my grandfather was born right after the Civil War.
Wow.
So he, grew up in kind of an idyllic little upper Midwest town. There was a series of bank failures, which came from a kind of spun off from it's kind of odd to even think this today, but a Republican Party kind of socialist-y progressive movement that was going on at the time. And they were kind of forced out of their home and ended up traveling the country with everything they were able to keep with them tied to the car. And it was about 1924.
Wow.
And they traveled around a great deal. My dad got a lot of experience that he would later use in his career, seeing the American West firsthand, and at a time when the Wild West elements of the American West were still around in the form of older people. He worked baling hay one summer in the Pecos Valley of New Mexico. And on the various crews that he worked with, there were 5 people that had personally known Billy the Kid.
Wow.
He actually worked. He actually worked for the lady who inadvertently sent Billy to his death the night that Pat Garrett shot him, and so the family traveled around as itinerant workers for a while. My dad peeled off and went to sea for a while. He came back again, traveling around the country. They finally settled in Oklahoma, where he lived for about 10 or 12 years and started his writing career there. He started writing for smaller literary magazines, kind of Hemingway-esque, kind of personal adventure type stories. Those didn't sell very well. He kind of shifted sideways into a little bit more kind of blood and thunder, high adventure stories in the pulp magazines. Did modestly well at that. He was earning a living, but he was at that point still living on his parents' porch. Not really his parents' porch. He and his brother had gotten together and gotten his parents to move to this little acreage outside of Choctaw, Oklahoma, that his older brother owned. And so my dad and his parents lived there for a while until he was drafted. After that, came out to California, and actually, really had to, if he wanted to kind of stay alive and have everything that he needed to keep eating and keep writing, he had to sell a story a week.
Wow.
Which means he had to write quite a few more than that. And he did that for a number of years. Pulp magazines collapsed. There were some fortuitous and unfortuitous events, and he was able to transition his career into writing paperback originals, which he did from the early 1950s all the way through the end of his career. But it was really the mid 1970s when he became like the kind of household name, kind of Louis L'Amour legacy that I think you're thinking of.
Yeah. And that's it's interesting. I've had some other children of someone who's been famous on my show. And one of the common things that seems to come out in conversation with family members who have had someone of notoriety in their family is, it's interesting. I had one conversation with Adam Nimoy, his father's Leonard Nimoy. Okay. And Adam was saying that he always felt like he grew up in front of the spotlight. Like the attention was from his father and people wanted to get close to his father, but he just felt like he was always stretched, trying to get time with his dad and build a relationship with his father without having to be under the scrutiny of the public or opinion or all that, right? And he always had that delicate balance between the two. And he was selfish and he was a little bit jealous of the time with his dad, for example. Did you ever find that in your dad's journey where you had to kind of wrestle to have time with him and that connection? That wasn't a serious
I would
situation?
say yes and no. So first off, my dad wasn't a public-facing celebrity like Leonard Nimoy was. And I'm guessing that the son that you're talking about is somewhere around my age. He was born in the 60s.
Right.
Yeah. And so, his dad was just hitting it. Leonard Nimoy was in a film of my dad's. We met him a couple of times over the years. But, what you're talking about is a kid that came along right when the height of popularity. And then, of course, Star Trek in particular had this sort of trailing popularity that roller coastered over the years. Right. And my dad's situation was much more even than that, and particularly in my childhood, much more low key. So okay. he was known, but it's like a writer in Los Angeles. It's like one of how many thousands, and nobody knows who they are, and nobody particularly cares. And hopefully they can keep writing and keep making some money. Dad was very, very, very dedicated to his work. And I have come to appreciate this actually vastly more in subsequent years, because I'll get into that in a second. Anyway, he He would always make time for my sister and I, not necessarily much, but kind of almost any time we wanted. I don't really know how we were trained, but we sort of knew to come to the door of his office and stop
Mm.
and wait. And he'd get to a point where he could stop. And then, you might have like 10 or 15 minutes with him. And then he'd be like, I got to get back to work, you know,
Yeah.
uh, move on. And so he was always available, not necessarily in big, I'm going to coach the little league team,
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
nothing like that. But he was always available in almost any small increment that you wanted. The thing that I have recognized about his dedication to the work is not just discipline and the discipline that a writer needs to just keep at it, but it goes a little deeper than that. Dad wrote very much from his unconscious. He truly didn't know what was going to happen at the bottom of a page when he cranked a new page into the typewriter.
Mm.
And he had not always been able to write that way. He had been much more of a guy who had to sort of plot things out. And at a certain point, he hit this critical mass of having done it so much that it could just flow. But opening the doors of the unconscious to allow that to happen is not something that happens easily. And if you allow them to close and stay closed for any length of time, it becomes more and more and more difficult to get that sort of flow back. I started noticing this even before I noticed it in my own writing.
Yeah.
I started noticing this studying acting, and you would see an actor who had rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed what they were doing to the point where it was second nature, where they could do those lines differently. If three other people were playing the other part and feeding them different things, they could continually adjust without ever having thought about it. And then sometimes you'd see somebody, and all of a sudden, as you're watching it, the performance, the reactions, the way the person was doing it would just slow way down. Okay. And the typical comment between actors and directors and things like that is, oh, they went up in their head. They started thinking, it stopped flowing, and they started thinking about it. They started doing it intentionally rather than letting it out. And Dad was aware that work was a much more arduous experience if you had to be intellectually turning the gears all the time rather than letting it happen. So he never wanted a day to go by without doing some work. And so very important. Yeah.
When did you start to become curious about writing? What age?
I don't know. I mean, kids are always writing, right?
Yeah.
Kids are always creating some imaginary experience or doing something of the sort. And so as I grew up, of course, we lived in Los Angeles, so I was very interested in the film business and doing that, kind of playing with making little movies and things like that allows you to almost, kind of play your creativity to another level where you're sort of storing it and then doing something else with it. And so that kind of fed into more and more and more elaborate kid productions.
Yeah.
And eventually we started noticing that, there were parts of it that didn't come together all that well or something of the sort. And it really needed to be better written. So maybe we'd better focus on that. And of course, I was the person who ended up doing a lot of that. And I wasn't ever any good at writing until I was in my 20s. And so I had gone through film school, I had written, I had done all kinds of stuff where I was supposedly doing this, but I wasn't doing a very good job. And Random House, or it was Bantam Dell in those days, my dad's publisher started doing these audio books that were like old-time radio dramas.
Mm-hmm.
And the first couple that they did were transcribed literally word for word out of my dad's short story. And fiction writing, prose, it's not good drama writing. You tend to almost do the opposite things. A scene in a short story or a novel is almost like it's shorthand with just the best parts done in dialogue.
Right.
Whereas if you're doing actually a play, if you're doing something that actors have to do, you have to give the actor like every rung of the emotional ladder that will allow them to get to the point they have to get to. If something's missing, they can't play it.
Right.
I had been studying acting, and I knew that I needed to do something to fix these. My dad asked me to come in and see if I could improve the scripts and the performances and things like that. And so I thought, well, gosh, I better do one of my own first to just kind of make sure I actually know what I'm talking about. I kind of think I know what I'm talking about, but not really. And so when I sat down to write that first script, I started using what I knew as an actor, and using what I knew. If in the case of drama, the actor is the writer's customer, I started looking at it like, okay, what do I have to provide my customer with? And that was a really big breakthrough to write something that was truly intelligible with actors, so that the actors could play the scenes, and the scenes always had like a nice kind of dramatic punch, pushed you into the next scene, stuff like that.
Interesting. Yeah, I love when books take on a life on film, and I love that kind of correlation between the two. I love when an author can write visually as well, because it does set the stage for us as readers to insert ourselves into the story. That's a gift. Again, you're talking about the actor being the customer, but for an author, the reader is the customer, right? In that sense.
Yeah.
So how do you bring them in, right, as a writer?
Well, there's a couple of different levels to that, because of course you said writing visually, and I think you were talking about writing the descriptions of things and putting words on a page, right, in a way that evokes kind of a you are there sort of experience. But I would say you take a step back from that. Fiction writing, a writer's writing, a novelist's writing, is code, like computer code. You are using the letters of the alphabet, okay, as that code. And it has these interesting different levels in that how you present, my dad was a big one for this, how you present things on a page. It's like, don't create this giant block of type, huge long paragraphs, unless you want your reader to slow down. Okay. So the more densely packed the information, you might think that might cause somebody to read faster, but it doesn't. Their eye needs a moment to rest. They need a moment to take in an idea before they go on to the next. And the more you break it up, the faster it goes. Oddly, computer data stores very well the same way. If you partition a drive in more pieces, you get more space on the drive.
Right.
Okay? It's weird how it works like that. And it works like that in film too. If you have a very long scene with few cuts, it feels longer than the same length scene with more cuts. So there's something about this that has almost a universal quality to it. The second thing is, my dad gets a lot of credit for, writing great locations and great places and things like this, and describing things just as they really are and everything. I got to tell you, his secret was don't write much. My dad was a master at knowing what not to write. Just enough to get the audience's imagination doing half the work. And to a great extent, it is interesting that this is kind of a difference between popular writing and literature. Very often, literature tries to do everything.
Right.
Basically, I don't like to put it this way, but I'm going to, it patronizes the reader by saying, I'm going to feed you everything. Yeah. Whereas popular writing, particularly the popular writing of the mid to late 20th century, where there were some real masters, my dad was one of many. Yeah. They would give you just enough to get you going. and then they would move on. It's such a convincing experience because it's your experience, you know, and the
Yeah.
writer is just leading you, which is masterful. It's wonderful. I mean, in my own writing, I wish I was better at it. I try to be okay at it, but I'm nowhere near as good as my dad.
Yeah, I was talking to one author, and we talked about like leading the witness, I guess you would say in legal terms, but leading the reader. And for example, to say a scene simple like, I walked into my grandmother's kitchen and she was baking fresh pies. Now you could talk about the color of the kitchen, what your grandmother was wearing. You're describing your grandmother in that setting. But when I read that, I'm putting myself in my grandmother's kitchen and what pies she would make compared to what pies your grandmother makes. And in that moment, I'm in my grandmother's kitchen. I just love that kind of context. To your point, I feel more connected with the story when I can insert myself in my realm and my lens to what's happening in the writing. That's amazing.
There's a thriller writer, Alan Furst, Furst, who does a lot of kind of pre-World War II spy stuff, all very good. But this man in a 14-word sentence can like put you in a grimy street in Paris in the dark. I mean, just like that. He's amazing at it. He has very similar qualities to my dad. The material doesn't read anywhere near the same, but he had the capacity to, in a very few words, just put you into the imaginary experience.
Any other things that you've picked up by osmosis, being around your father, that you find kind of coming back in your own writing now?
I don't know, probably a lot. A lot of my writing, of course, has to do with his writing. So it's very hard to pull the two things apart. It's sort of, if I'm not working on finishing a work of fiction of his or something, I'm writing commentary on how this work of fiction occurred, what the history of it was and things like that. So of course it's so intertwined. Ask me more questions and maybe more things will pop out.
You did share on a podcast about going into your father's work area where he would write in his library, and I got the sense of a cluttered room full of memories, half worked on projects, books everywhere, papers stacked on top of papers, and just this feeling of creativity within four walls of a room. Can you kind of explain what you remember about your dad and kind of the setting of where he's writing? I think that's great for a reader.
I think you got that exactly, exactly right. So there were, my experience of my dad's workspace went through several generations. And the first, we had a little house in the Hollywood Hills when I was a child, and he had a room that was about 10 by 10, 10 by 12, had a desk built into it, sliding glass door that basically looked at a plaster wall. Didn't have much of a view. If you angled your head, you could see the backyard, but you had to kind of angle your head pretty good. And books everywhere, shelves of books. Dad was, he never left an article of clothing unhung on a hanger, but his workspace was piled in just random piles of paper and books. And, he was moving kind of quickly, and he had a pretty good memory for where he put things down, so it didn't bother him too much. And he so there were a lot of piles of paper around, and in that house he kept his barbells and stuff on the floor at one side of the room. He'd carry them outside to work out in the afternoons. And then we moved out of that neighborhood, which was very funky, very beatnik, very beatnik neighborhood. It was West Hollywood in the 1960s. This was a place that was like living in the East Village in New York or Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco at the same time period. There was Sunset Boulevard was a block away, and it was probably 10 blocks of nightclubs and, and stuff like that. People sleeping on the sidewalk everywhere. The Doors were playing down the street at the Whiskey a Go Go.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a very, very funky place. And when his career started to pick up, although it picked up considerably more slightly later, we moved to West Los Angeles, a very much more formal, much more subdued neighborhood right near UCLA. Kind of wide streets and bigger houses and very, very calm. And in that house, we didn't have a place for him to work. He took over kind of an area that was just off the entrance hall, and we had a kind of one of the we moved in, and he sort of set up his chair and piled a couple of boxes of books. We didn't have any bookshelves for his unbelievable number of books in the house yet. And he kind of piled up a couple of boxes of books, and he was working with the typewriter on the boxes of books. And one of the workmen thought that was ridiculous, and he went out and got an old old work table with some telescoping legs and brought it in and gave it to him. And so he worked on that for a couple of years, and we finally built a big, beautiful library. So a very large room, probably 400 to 500 square feet, with 12-foot high, 4 sets of 12-foot high bookshelves that hinged in the middle so that you could get to more books behind. It was, by that point, it was, very upscale and very, very nice. I was probably about 16 or so when all of it, 15 or 16 when all that came about.
For your father, then, how did he find inspiration? What kind of authors and writers was he looking to? I'm always curious to find that inspiration for authors.
He did read fiction very much, and when he didn't read fiction that was anything like anything he was working on.
Yeah.
Intentionally.
Yeah.
He read a lot of history. You hear these stories about Louis L'Amour and his research and all this kind of stuff. Some of it is a little overdone. He wasn't a guy who would write a book and then go through every detail and check it or anything like that.
Yeah.
But he read a great deal of history for inspiration prior to writing. And sometimes it was many years before a story would completely gel in his mind, and he would choose to write it. So a lot of times he was reading for inspiration that wouldn't really bite and turn into a project for, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years.
Yeah.
So constant reading, history, current events, science stuff, not all, certainly not all about the American West. His library, it's still at my mom's house. It's, maybe 20,000 books. So it's a big private library.
Wow.
I doubt even a quarter of it. So let's say maybe a fifth of it has to do with the American West. So an awful lot of other stuff, a lot of it history, but that he also drew a lot of inspiration from either remembering places that he had lived and worked, many of which are the ones that he wrote about, or going out and visiting places that he would then write about. The thing, I mentioned that it may be somewhat of an overstatement that his stories were fantastically researched, but the geography was really spot on. And the myth of the perfect research kind of came out of the reality of actually being very attentive to the topography of the places that he was writing about.
If we could have a moment with your dad on the podcast, and he could speak to a new author here, eager to learn, to grasp some knowledge from him, was there something that he liked to talk about? Was there something he liked to share to encourage a fellow author? It'd be great to kind of honor the authors that are listening to the podcast and encourage them on their journey as they look to your dad as an inspiration, and to you as well.
I think he would say something along the lines of uh, being temperamental is for people who are independently wealthy. Put your butt in the seat and start writing and keep writing and keep writing and keep writing.
That's a good perspective. I like that.
Um, uh, it's he was definitely someone who taught himself through doing it.
Hmm.
I think he felt that, and as I was just saying, there's also that opening the door to the unconscious thing, and that you
Right.
you kind of have to do you have to do it in order to do it.
Yeah.
It's always a struggle for me because I tend to get myself into creative projects where I will do all the creative writing work, and then I'll have done like I did a couple of very, very advanced audio dramas. I mean, easily as complex dialogue cut, sound effects, music as a feature film, except it was just me and one other guy doing it. So the post production on it went on and on and on. It was a very intense technical work. Or I'll do something like a graphic novel, so get the script ready to go, get the thing laid out. But then it's 2 years of technical work with the artist, getting every page exactly right. Hey, you missed the pocket on this guy's vest. We need to get a pocket to go in there. Just all this kind of very technical stuff. And so I tend to flip back and forth from one to the other, and the transition back into the pure creative mode's really hard.
Hmm.
Dad was really right about this. It's difficult.
For readers that are here, Beau, and they're looking to you as an author, talk a little bit about your work now. We've celebrated your father and a great light for authors and for readers alike. Talk a little bit more about what you're working on. So I'd love for people to can connect with you more about what you're doing as well.
No, the only thing that's important, I mean, I work with my dad's stuff.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like I'm not out there chasing an individual career for myself. I jokingly said to somebody the other day, if I was 30 years old and I was still trying to get girls or something like this, maybe I would care to have my name in lights. So it's just I finished my dad's stories. I've written a couple of his ideas from scratch to these scripts, things like this. I wouldn't, if somebody says, what do you do? I never say I'm an author. I say I work in the publishing business, because I kind of do everything along the line from the authorship all the way through marketing sometimes.
To give voice to your father's work is great.
Yeah.
Did he ever talk to you about projects that he didn't get to finish or that he wanted to do? What kind of conversations did you have about those?
There were quite a few of them. Stories that he was frustrated with. It wasn't coming out the way he hoped. Stories that I would read some of it and we would discuss it. I'm not gonna get, because the timelines in publishing are so long. I don't like to talk about a project that's not coming out right away.
Yeah.
I'm working on a project. I'm quite well through it. Where he and I, he showed me a manuscript many years ago, and asked my opinion on it, because he was having trouble with another story, and he was saying, well, maybe I'll substitute this one in, but I'd have to go back to working on it. And we were talking about it and came up with a bunch of ideas that changed it quite a bit, and he had really written this particular story a couple of times already. I mean, he'd played around with the basic plot of it a couple of times, and he'd done one of them so well that my commentary to him was sort of like, we need to turn this into something else, because you've already done the best version of that one. And I don't think doing it again, bigger, longer, and louder is gonna really be the answer. And so we threw around a number of ideas, and now here we are 30 something years later, and I'm actually about to, I'm going to say, finish it and all those quotey kind of things, because it's not writing the end the first time isn't really finished.
Right.
So anyway, yeah, we talked about a number of things like that.
Nice. Do you still feel like he's leading and guiding you through the process?
I wish he would lead and guide me more.
Come on. Yeah.
I would take all I could get, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, there is that. And there's also a thing, I don't think he ever really articulated it this way, but he seemed to react like he believed what I'm about to say. If you get into the story far enough, it will tell you what it wants to become. And you need to listen to that. And you need to you need to basically say, that is what this thing wants to become. And I am like a medium for that. And attempting to turn it into something else, okay, is not wise. No matter what you might want to do with it. I mean, in the case of the story that I was just discussing, the story that I'm currently working on, he was attempting to turn it into a somewhat more grand version of something he'd already done, but there were really, truly like specific logical reasons why making it bigger hurt it. And so it was kind of like, we need to find something else for this thing to become, because you're basically driving down a road that you've already traveled, and you don't need to do it. You don't need to do it again. And you're trying to force this thing to become something you already did perfectly. And so we need to let it become something else. And then we discussed many options for what we were going to let it become, which are only being worked out now.
For the authors that are listening and they're thinking that sharing their story through memoir or fiction, whatever it is, could be part of their legacy that they're leaving behind. Anything that your father was focused on around legacy, was that even a consideration for him?
He was very proud of the fact that he'd done a lot of work and he'd entertained a lot of people.
Yeah.
I don't know that he occasionally had kind of momentarily sort of grandiose visions of it, but then he was sort of like, I'm an entertainer, I hope people really enjoy this stuff, and I hope they'll continue to enjoy this stuff as long as possible. I'm not sure that he ever had any idea we'd get this far down the road.
You think he'd be proud of where we are today with his work?
I think he'd be amazed.
Yeah.
I think he'd be absolutely amazed, particularly given all of the vast changes in the culture and in the book business and things like this. I mean, maybe not if he was looking back from today.
Yeah.
And he saw that his career really kind of took off at the end of the period when Westerns were popular. And so he had some magic that could extend that period. And some of it was that he had felt kind of trapped in the genre and wanted to get out and write other things, found that was very difficult, and he had a family to support, so he couldn't afford to do that.
Yeah.
So he started trying to very gently stretch what was possible in the genre. And the Western genre is very, very brittle. Fans, they want everything new and they want nothing new all at the same time.
At the same time, yeah.
And so he knew he had to be very delicate about saying, okay, I'm going to write some things about the earlier time in the West. I'm going to do a Western that brings in some European influences. I'm going to do a contemporary Western mystery that looks back into the 19th century. I'm going to, he would very gently kind of pull the space open bigger, and then climb through it a little bit, And he was doing that, luckily, right at the time of the bicentennial, which had people thinking about American history in kind of a bigger sense. He was doing that at a time when the popular culture I mean, just to take a popular culture that surrounded us enormously when we were in West Hollywood, the music business,
Yeah.
where things had transitioned in the 1960s from, kind of the British invasion version of rock and roll to the more kind of Americana version of rock and roll that was the Eagles and
Yeah.
Buffalo Springfield and Leonard Skinner and things like that. And so what happened is this kind of American folk thing was happening even as the Western genre was starting to slip into almost parody. In the 1970s, there were a lot of people who were doing it who just could not take it seriously any longer. And yet the culture was definitely dealing with American roots in a new and different way. And he wasn't a guy that went down on the Sunset Strip and studied the hippies, but
Yeah.
he did pick up on it. And I think initially he'd be surprised that he had made it this far, and then maybe he wouldn't be so surprised because he would see that he had done things to kind of find a more complex place in American literature, if you want to say it in that fancy a way.
So, Beau, for people that are interested to know more about your father and the work that you're doing to continue the story and the legacy of your dad, I kind of want to wrap up in a second, but where would you like to send our listeners so they can stay in touch and follow the journey and see what's coming next?
I think the best place is louislamour.com, LOUISLAMOUR.com. There's no capitals, there's no apostrophe. And that will take them. We have a bunch of other websites that go into all kinds of stuff in deep detail, but that website will take you to the others. You can look through the menus and find ways of investigating Louis's adventure stories or this Lost Treasures series, which is kind of the story behind the story, where I'm repackaging a lot of my dad's stuff with what was he up to, how was the story told, how did he do research, just articles on all kinds of different things that pertain to each story. There's a website that deals with that you can find from there. But I would suggest, if anybody's looking into what Louis L'Amour is all about these days, you want to specifically look for any of the books in the Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures series, because they not only contain this great story, but they also have a piece, each one has a different piece of the professional biography of Louis L'Amour. Basically, you can learn all about his career through the stories that he was writing if you read those books.
Going back to that story of you in his office, going through his books and papers and things, any surprises that you found,
yeah.
the treasure? Can you tell us?
Not too long after my dad passed away, going through all the giant piles of paper and everything, we found a couple of old, they were boxes of carbon paper. Writers used to use second sheets because they were, there weren't really copying machines that were very easy to use in those days. So you made yourself a copy as you were going along using carbon paper. And there were a couple of old carbon paper boxes that were just stacked full of short stories that had never been published. And many of them were from the later period. So when the pulp magazines died, everybody in the short story business started competing for the few slots that were left in the slick magazines, the real quality magazines. And this is the 1950s that this happened. And this is when some of the greatest writers writing short stories, John Updike, people like that, much more kind of highly placed literary figures than my dad, were competing for those slots. So he sold in that market relatively well, but he wrote a lot of stuff, somewhat more literary material for that stuff that, for those type of magazines, that didn't get published because there weren't that many spaces. And so I hit a good deal of those. We published those all through the 1990s in new short story collections.
Nice. So there's a library of your father's works that we could fill our house with. As he has filled his home with so many great authors, we can also do the same.
Well, that's true.
By coming and supporting, right? I like that. Excellent. Beau, thank you so much for doing this, for
you.
sharing a light on your father and continuing again, like I mentioned, to continue to keep the legacy moving forward and finishing up some of the things that he wanted to see done. And I love the father-son connection here. I just think that's a beautiful thing. So I'm sure he's very proud of what's happening here. And if he has any vision to it, I'm sure he's smiling as you're continuing this journey for him. So, Beau, thank you so much for making time to be part of this.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Great show.
Awesome. We'll include links for everybody in the show notes. Go there and grab a copy, start reading, start doing your research. There's so much to fall in love with. And again, Beau, it's so great to have a conversation with you about your dad and talking about all these great things. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Take care.
Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast. Glad to have you here. I just want to let you know that you can always find out what we're doing live in the moment by going to our YouTube channel. Head over to livingthenextchapter.com. There'll be a link right there. Head over to our YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, do all the things that all the YouTubers love to say. And in our YouTube channel, a couple things. You're going to get advanced listens. You're going to get the episodes that we're working on in real time. So we record and post daily on our YouTube channel. I'd love for you to give us a follow over there. As well, we're making playlists. We have over 500 episodes. So finding the right episode for you, we're trying to group things into playlists. So if you like children's books, if you like business, you like historical fiction, we're grouping our authors together to make it a little easier for you to find your favorite next author. So head over to livingthenextchapter.com. And again, I'd love to hear from you. Hearing from the listeners of the show is great. And I just want to say thank you for being a part of the podcast family. And I look forward to having you back for the next episode. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time and your listen. Take care.